thing for it, but we'll still I still want to get this out there and up. All right. Well, welcome to Common Mansplaining. Whew. We have had technical difficulties that are common to man. We are not elites with a large production staff, so sometimes YouTube is temperamental, and my phone had downloaded some update. It was difficult for me to anyway. We'll get this sorted out, but we do want to talk about the topic du jour this week, which has been the Somali fraud case in Minnesota. Um, now, Eddie and I have talked about this, but Eddie and I both have very similar, not identical, but similar right of center views on immigration. And I thought it would be good to have this discussion with Judy, who's a little more left of center. Um, and talk about not only to go over the Somali case, but to go over some of the implications about government and our expectations of government. Now, a couple of things about this that I want to that are noteworthy to me. I talked to a good friend of mine this last weekend on Saturday last, and he hadn't heard anything about this. This was completely off his radar. And he's reasonably well informed. He's not connected. He's not living under a rock. So this is still a story that maybe a lot of people haven't gotten out on, and it's been heavily spun and tried to be de-emphasized. So a couple things on that. So one thing is the story was broken before Thanksgiving by a magazine called the City Journal out of New York. They're right of center. And what they were reporting on were convictions. They weren't reporting on allegations. They weren't reporting on, their own investigation. They were reporting on a series of convictions, some as far back as 2022 under Merrick Garland in the previous administration, but had gone completely unreported. Barely anything in Minnesota, certainly nothing on the national level. But there continued to be new indictments and new things found out. The breadth of this scandal, over $1 billion now. And what their investigation was that some of this money fraudulently taken by Somalis was not just spent on luxuries, but was reaching terrorist organization Al-Shabaab, which is sort of the Muslim Al-Qaeda terrorist organization equivalent that's headquartered there in Somalia. Now, the left media has pushed back on that because none of the charges, criminal charges, have involved that sort of terrorism funding. But that's largely because the tracking system in third world countries for banking transactions drops off a cliff and does not meet the standard of evidence here in the United States. So it's kind of inadmissible. But they do have record of wiring transfers from people that have been convicted of sending money to Somalia, to parts of Mogadishu that are heavily controlled by this Al-Shabaab group. Obviously, they're just turned into cash, and they're saying, well, we just want those people to buy food and clothing, but there's strong implications that some of that cash made its way through intimidation or theft or other ways to Al-Shabaab, especially because this was millions of dollars. 16% of Somalia's economy comes from these kind of remittances from the United States. So these are the sort of troubling aspects that were underreported. And when it was first reported, CBS News actually denied it and said it was all sort of right-wing heresy and conspiracy theory. And the New York Times had to push back and said, no, all of this is true. And even though none of the charges, again, criminal charges involve terrorism, right? The implications that some of this money got to Al-Shabaab is pretty much common sense, even if you're not able to show a bank receipt of somebody, sort of a flaming gun bank receipt of Al-Shabaab's bank account receiving money from this person. Now the overreaction, Trump who was following this story when it broke, immediately said that he was revoking the protected status for Somalis, which was something one of the people recommended. But he's also said he wants to ban all immigration from third world countries, and that's obviously an overreaction. But my question to Judy and to people, because here on this channel we like to come together in common sense and try to set aside spin and personal attacks. We're not elites. We don't have any skin in this game. What are some common sense solutions or lessons learned, things that we can change in reaction to this case? And Judy, I'm interested in some of your thoughts. You talk about overall or directly related to that. What changes you think you'd like to see?
Uh, well, I guess adding some context to how this happened too. So
Sure.
I think that like a lot of it had to do with they completely did away with a lot of the barriers that are usually in place because of the extraordinary circumstances of COVID. And
Yes.
so a lot of the stopgaps that should have been there, like with reporting, were waived. Unfortunately, also, what seems to have happened is that this particular group called Feeding Our Futures, that's what we're talking about with the people involved, they had accused the Minnesota government of racism and discrimination.
We're
And
trying to
so
police. We're trying to police it, right?
yes, for well, no. So they were saying that they were not being awarded the money that they should have been
Oh,
awarded.
good.
So then the Minnesota government unfortunately reacted by waiving what was left of like the requirements and the controls that they had to meet to be able to say where the money was going, where it was being spent, who it was going to, and everything. And so it was kind of a storm of factors that caused this to happen. So this is to say that this is not something that typically happens. Like, sure, there's Medicare fraud, there's Medicaid fraud, there's every kind of fraud there is. There's people who wake up and think about how to defraud the
Mhm.
government every day, but like but it's not like a typical. These were extraordinary circumstances, is my point, and so the
But extraordinary opportunity for con men, or I mean, like they found this loophole was not just a hole, but a gaping wide chasm, very easy to draw through, or
yeah.
the breadth of the money.
Right, and because in the circumstance that we're talking about also, it would have been terrible for someone to starve to death.
Mhm.
So what we're left with, so we're saying, so like, which is not to say like giving someone $2 billion to make sure that someone doesn't starve to death, is the solution. But it's like they couldn't they couldn't meet their normal they couldn't enforce their normal reporting requirements at that time. And so what I'm guessing is we're probably going to hear about a whole lot more of these sorts of things. I bet we're going to I mean, because if they just pretty much waived reporting requirements, and then, it was easy to kind of like make them back off what still existed, then this is probably the case that there's a whole lot more of it. Um,
There have been rumors that there are some cases, indictments, some things going into, because now they're looking into other communities that did this. One in Columbus, Ohio, that supposedly had some questionable receipts, but that people weren't looking into because of cultural sensitivities, i.e., worried about being called racist if they question the validity of some of these receipts that seemed fishy.
Yeah, and I guess, I think the thing is that also, like, it's not just that they're worried about being called racist, they are worried that they actually are being racist, so it's not just that people are like, "Oh, I don't wanna be called racist, so I'm not gonna ever enforce anything." It's where they reconsider, like, are these requirements that we're imposing actually racist for some
Oh,
reason? Yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah. So I think, like, rightly or wrongly, I'm gonna say, but,
Okay.
like, it's a question worth considering when there's a group of people who are saying the system isn't fair, and it's intentionally like set up to oppress one group or another, and then like the people in charge who are in charge of disbursement or whatever are like they haven't gone through any kind of process to make sure that that's not the case, or maybe they are inclined to believe, yes, we have discriminated against groups before because of like the color of their skin. So I'm gonna like say in the defense of um like the powers that be in Minnesota or whatever, that it might have been the case that they have at times acted in a racist fashion, and so
Mm.
they needed
This
to
was an
change.
overcorrection.
Yeah, so it can happen, and so um or just like that the requirements for this particular group, I mean, like it's a nonprofit group, but it depends on like there's a lot of laws and regulations to nonprofits, but I guess the case is that everybody is not so professional,
Okay.
and so like I think there's a lot of like nuances that are unknown, and like even to like the report in the City Journal, like I don't know if I read the original report, but the I think it was the follow-up report that I read. Like I disagree with Chris Rufo's assessment of Norwegians, and he compared Norwegians like
Oh yeah, his culture. So yeah, so that was his commentary on not the reporting of it. Yeah, that you read. I
okay,
sent
yeah.
that to you. Yeah.
And I disagree with that because I want to say if Norway was a country that had no functioning government for like 30 or 40 years,
Mhm.
and it was just like rife with like warlords and
Mhm.
gangs, and it was a crossroads of the world. Somalia is a crossroads. It's like
Mhm.
it's in a much different geographic location. Like, let's wait until Russia invades Norway and then the government of Norway falls and there's no functioning government for 40 years, and then let's see how much we like how much we laud their civilization,
Well,
so
but all right. So all right. Then this is let's say this isn't a racist thing. This is a matter of fact or sort of taken. Is that Somalia is a fallen state, right? People that have lived there for the last 40 years have lived in a fallen state. Is that a correct objective assessment, you would say?
yeah, there's been no functioning government
Yeah,
for a long
no
time.
functioning government, right? And mores about stealing from the government or things. Obviously, piracy is a big part of their economy there. Um, they don't have those same sort of norms, right? So, right, I think what he was saying, what Griffith was saying, is that we should reevaluate the wisdom of whether allowing large numbers of these people to immigrate to the U.S. Is a good thing. He would say that this proves that it's not,
But
because
it's
that
not.
they're going to be incompatible with America because they're going to struggle to assimilate with America because of what they've come from. It's sort of like the
We're
other
not
nation
talking
I can
large.
think of. Oh, sorry. Go on.
We're not talking about large numbers. Like I think
80,000 people all living together
of
is still a
350 million.
what was that?
Of 350 million total. It's like not. It's like a small town of people.
Uh, fair enough, fair enough. But if we're bringing in anyone and they're right, we're bringing them to a place with very generous government benefits, right? With this that's set up for Minnesota of all has right what Rufo said has a system that's very Nordic in their thing that has all these safety nets and tries to be very generous, has high taxes because of that, but has all of these social services. Immigrants come into this thing where they come from a culture of, hey, if we can get something from the government, we need to do it, not whether we need it or not, right? If that's an opportunity, It's almost like entrepreneurial. We need to just take on that. Those types of things should be scrutinized even more for fraud. Like if the other country I can think of that has a reputation for criminal activity is Albania. And we would think if a large number, 80,000 Albanians immigrated and lived here and immediately started putting claims to the government, that we would want to do some scrutiny to make sure that those were, we'd want to see receipts that what services they were asking for were legitimate. It's not right. Minnesota saying we're not. They want to feed 6 children, but right. We want to actually see that this is happening, right? And so the fact that it was known that Somalia was a failed state and they escaped any kind of scrutiny, right, speaks to what you've admitted to me out the show, is that the leadership, starting with Tim Walz, was, shall we say, less than competent, was not right. So you would say, in retrospect, Captain Hindsight, we should have been more suspicious of them from the beginning. Is that fair?
No,
Okay.
I'm not saying that at all. In fact, I think,
Right.
yes, to your point that the government probably should have put more scrutiny on this organization, and they didn't. So bad on them. But so the majority of the people involved are U.S. citizens. So they've lived here long enough to acquire citizenship, to qualify for citizenship, and whatever, to whatever degree that means that they have to not put up any red flags. Like the government just doesn't like give you a passport when you walk in. In fact, you can't even travel. You can't go to your home country. So the majority of the people involved were U.S. citizens, which should mean that they've assimilated to the culture to some degree. They need to understand the laws of the U.S. government, which is probably, like, to tell you the truth, it probably has something to do with them understanding how the laws work, that they were able to pull this off. Not that they were like ignorant people just right off a boat or something like that. Second of
Yeah.
all, people who come as like refugees have to also be vetted by outside agencies before they come to the United States. They have to spend time in a like a second country first, and then the United States has to be at least the third country. And so they spend time elsewhere being vetted. The United States just doesn't like fly planes and like pick people up and say
Well, no issue. Yes.
they didn't like fly. Yeah, like Tim Walz didn't like pilot a plane to Mogadishu and say like, "Come on, everybody," and so there's a lot of vetting that goes on. These people perhaps had no like criminal background or were able to go under the radar.
All right.
It's
Well,
really hard.
here's the thing that's also the same. So some of the more recent refugees, right, that are not U.S. citizens could have been preyed upon by these fraudsters. Something like, hey, right. One of the things that they did was they recognized that the benefits were much higher if a parent said that their child was autistic. They would go to somebody and say, "Hey, say your child's autistic, we'll give you $1,000." Right? Can prey upon, somebody's like, "Hey, $1,000, that's big money," or something like that, and something that from there, where they're coming from, wouldn't be as stigmatized as it is here, and then that enables this criminal organization, the citizens, the people with all the money, now to manipulate that sort of classification and make money and fraud and things like that. So what it seems is, yeah, that they possibly preyed upon the Somalis there, but took advantage of a situation where they knew there would not be oversight that would be on other groups, right? And even in reporting at the City Journal, right? Because they're reporting on convictions. Um, Rufo says he was called racist just for reporting on it. And he says, well, the fact should be whether it's true or not whether or not this makes a group. The fact that the Somalians are black shouldn't matter. Now, you dispute his claims about culture, about Norway and Somalian culture differences, but do you think the fact that Somalians are black does matter or doesn't matter?
I That's hard to say. I know that I think the term is thrown around so much that it's almost entirely lost meaning in a certain sense. It's just a way to say like you're mean almost.
Yeah,
Which I think is unfortunate because what it does is it diminishes actual claims of racism. Um,
absolutely,
and
absolutely.
so like and like I said, I didn't read the original article, so I don't
Okay.
know how racist or not racist it was in content.
Well, no, well, they were saying just the reporting of it, not in the manner, just bringing light to it to a national audience was
Uh,
racist.
yeah, there'll be people that'll say that. I mean, like you could say some you I mean, there's whatever those people's arguments are for saying it, I don't know. And so like I'm sure there's some way that you could be like, well, the Norwegians down the street are doing it too, and no one's reporting on that, which I mean it stands to reason with all the loopholes that they put in the system that the Norwegians down the street were also doing it, honestly.
Well, yeah, they did say that there were obviously. I mean, we're finding COVID fraud cases, and they're not all Somalians. This one's the breadth of it is very high, and the number of and there have been a lot of people convicted have been overwhelmingly Somali. Uh, um, that has made them reevaluate whether this community needs further scrutiny or not, whether they're being detrimental to the United States or whether they're being contributed to the United States.
It is
Now here's
unfortunate that it is unfortunate that it besmirches the name of Somalis everywhere, especially with the president in the national spotlight,
yeah,
making such a big deal about it.
he will overreact. So then back to what's the sort of common sense change that you think um is it just we check the receipts that we spend out money that we somebody has to personally see children being fed twice a week. Like, what's the level that of government oversight that you would require if the government's paying, which is ultimately taxpayers? Um, at what level do we need to verify, trust but verify, or is it distrust and verify? Like, what's the
Yeah, well, right, like it's you don't want to make it too difficult. I have to say, like it's probably better that there's a bit of graft in the system than that like people starve. But on the other hand, if you don't want the graft in the system to make it so expensive that the government can't afford to feed people who actually need it. So it's a balance. But I'll say also that I'll refer back to the extraordinary circumstances of COVID, which
COVID?
is not what we should have our typical government oversight and
Oversight.
processes in place now so that that doesn't happen. And what's happening with the crimes being prosecuted, it's not that it was caught too late, but it's
Mhm.
caught, it's being caught. So I am reluctant to say that more needs to be done with this. I think like it's like when there's a gap, it needs to be filled so that money doesn't drain out. But it need if it it's I've worked with refugees, and some states have much harder requirements than it sounds like Minnesota did to be on welfare. But it's often like all all that someone has to be able to
Yeah.
feed themselves
Well,
or their
right.
family.
Well, Trump had said like 88% of Somalis were on welfare, and people kicked back on that. But after doing some verification, the New York Times says it's 81%. So yeah, so he overstated it by 7%.
Yeah,
It's
but look,
still
look, I'm gonna say again, like this, you cannot imagine the hell that people come from when they have immigrated to America. Like that that they're alive at all is probably a shock to their system sometimes.
okay. So you would say that the current systems in place, just maybe new leadership, right? That when we have elections and new heads of department that can run them more effectively and scrutinizes all the really is in place, kind of what we have in place now, that we have an election, the new leadership will sort of fix it, and as long as we actually enforce our existing codes, we're fine. You don't think there's any sort of lesson learned or change that needs to be made?
I think, you know, like, if you said to someone, if you walked into a store these days, I know there are still stores like this, but if you walked
Mhm.
in and they said, "Please wear a mask, everybody wear a mask," you
Mhm.
would just be like, "For what? Why would I wear a mask?" You know, most people these days, they're like, "Why? So I can, like, rob the bank or something?" You know, so it's like, it doesn't it no longer makes sense. Like, what made sense then doesn't make sense now. So if they were to find that, like, there was an additional $2 billion graft, you know, let's say the Albanian organization down the street, like,
Mhm.
also does it, then yes, then there's something that needs to be fixed. But that's not the way it looks. It looks like the reason that this is gaining so much notoriety is precisely because it doesn't happen that much, and it's a big deal.
It's a lot. It's a large amount of money. So, so obviously, like Trump's, and I've already seen people, even people on the right, saying that ending all refugee program, that he's talking about is an overreaction, not the correct way to do it. Would there be some sort? Um, if people saying as a result of this, maybe if they're more skeptical of refugee claims, right? The fact is, right, under the Biden administration, because of the open borders, right, what they found was when Trump left office, there was about uh, something around 400,000 refugee claims that were being worked through. When he resumed office in 2025, it was something like 4 million, right?
Yeah.
And
You're,
so
I think, talking about asylum though, not refugees.
Well, yes, yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
but people,
they're a little
seeking asylum, but claiming refugee status. And so what it meant, what people had found is, right, they would actually seek out Border Patrol people to be arrested and say, "I'm a refugee seeking asylum." And there were so many cases they'd be given a court date in 9 years. Say, "All right, here court date in 9 years," and then they had 9 years of sort of, "Hey, I get to live in the U.S. for 9 years." When before, when you'd have a court date in 6 months or something, you could kind of process that. You could assess whether these asylum or refugee claims were legitimate. But you found like that people were gaming the system. This is sort of my thing. Like, yes, you can have generous benefits like Minnesota has, or the United States. We don't want children to starve. That's not something that anybody here is advocating for. But when you find that people are gaming the system, then you have to say, okay, we can't have this easy system anymore. And how many people are really starving in America, right? We're going to need some more evidence of that because you've been gaming the system, right? And so this is the backlash, right? When people game the system, they say, "Oh, this is an opportunity. This is a chasm I can take advantage of," right? Then there's an overcorrection. So Trump is trying to get that asylum claim down, so where somebody claims asylum, they can ideally they say, okay, you go before a judge in a month, and it will be able to determine if your asylum case is legit. If it is, you can stay here. If it's not, right, then we can adjudicate that, right? And so that's sort of like, I think a worthy goal. But people are very skeptical because the system was being gamed of anybody just claiming asylum or claiming that the only place they can come in the whole world for refugee to be a refugee is the United States, or Europe. And so uh, these are things that, because of controversies of immigrants, especially in Europe, being partaking in criminal activity, has made people more skeptical and less trusting of their claims of refugee status. Do you think that's fair or unfair? And how would we, is there a way? I mean, these communities, have they sort of earned this? Is there a way, a common sense solution or a middle ground compromise?
Yeah, so I just want to say, there's so many uh, children, grandchildren, refugees themselves that have contributed positively to American society.
Mhm.
So just because somebody is a broken mess running from a terrible country doesn't it doesn't mean anything about who they are or what they're able to
Okay.
contribute. So,
Yeah.
it is, it's really unfortunate that it got out of hand under the Biden administration because of this backlash. And I think it's terrible because it's there's people in need, and so now it's going to cause people in need to also suffer uh, alongside the people who have been gaming the system. And so
Mhm.
it's really so there. I don't know if like returning to the pre-Biden status quo or like pre-Trump status quo even, because like Obama, they called him the deporter in chief,
Yeah.
you know?
Obama maintained sort of the same level of deportation so that we would have a manageable level of asylum cases. Right? No, here's the common sense solution. I'll suggest mine. And one thing that makes people very skeptical of these claims is that these are working military aged men who are coming and claiming asylum, not women and children. These are men who come here who look to be healthy, that they could work in their countries, and they're coming and claiming that they're refugees, right?
Yeah, but look,
Not starving women or oppressed families, right? They're
but they
military age
are
males.
they're going to be recruited into gangs in like Honduras and places like that. They're being forced to. They're like these gangs are like coming to their villages and they're saying you fight with us or we kill you. So yes, they're under threat. They're being targeted precisely because they're military age able-bodied men.
And in the Middle East as well, Pakistan,
Probably, yes, probably
Somalia.
so, I would say. Like, yes, definitely Somalia. But like but yeah, I would say like anywhere where there's um you know there's a lot going on with the border between Pakistan and India, so I would not be surprised if, like, I'm not a foreign policy expert on every
Okay.
place in the
Yeah,
world.
yeah.
So
None of us are. This is common mansplaining. Everybody knows. Jude and I have degrees from prestigious universities, but yes, we're not experts on this, and so we are debating this as a common sense thing. But some people say common sense is that they're just coming to look for better employment opportunities than rather than build up their own country.
that
That's
can be
not
the
refugee status. If they're women and children who are really starving, right? These are the people that we should our hearts would open to, and so or fleeing, genocide type of thing like your ancestors did, rather than right tough gangs. Um, kind of feel like,
so
we're skeptical of that. Is that a common
it can be
sense?
a mixed cause, though. It can be
Okay.
mixed. It can be like you're under genuine threat of being recruited into a murderous gang and you want better work, or you need to support your family or something like that. So it's like yeah, it's like there's like a y-intercept and an x-intercept here, I guess, that we're talking about.
Well, right. Well, I think what one of our comments here, and Julie said, is that there are no solutions, only trade-offs. Right? Is that something you'd agree with, or you find that skeptical?
I think that is a mature position.
A mature position. So
Yeah.
considering trade-offs, and I guess that's the left and the right. That what we're willing to trade off is different from what the left is. Um, but what is all right? The bigger implication when I brought this up is that you felt like your norm or your expectation would be that government institutions will fail or will not work properly. And is that a reasonable expectation that the government is not going to administer a program like this, um, giving out money type of thing correctly, and maybe it should be done by somebody that's not the government.
No,
No,
because
sure.
the problem is that the motivation would be the same in both. So, like, say you had like, what you do is you have NGOs distributing this. That's how the
Mhm.
government works. The government partners with, non-governmental organizations like, uh, I'm trying to think of, like, the Lutheran, charity. I forget, I can't remember their exact name, but they all the resettlement agencies, like, almost all of them except for, like, the IRC are some sort of Christian orientation. Like, that's how they started. And, well, there's the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society also, but so they, uh, are not the government. And so like, the reason they're not the government is because people don't want the government doing it. And so instead they privatized it by having nonprofits do it. And so, like, if you so the motivation though is the same. It's that, anybody in charge of that much money is gonna have an incentive to to um, look for their own advantage. It's just like, it's part of the fraud triangle, and so that's why you have controls. But then if you have the controls waived, then they're useless. And so um anyway, it doesn't whether it's the government or whether it's NGOs. I mean, in some sense it's worse if it's NGOs, because people have no voting power over NGOs except to say, don't give the NGO money, or do give the NGO money. Like, I'm not going to vote for you again because you gave this NGO too much money. So in some
Okay.
sense it's better to have government involvement, because you can call up your representative and say, I don't want you to give $3,000 to the
Mhm.
Lutheran Aid Organization or whatever.
Okay. So is all right. Is it reasonable then to have a pause on benefits, saying, "All right, look, we're running deficits right now. Our budgets are strained. Let's have a pause on this for a few years, or for I don't know whatever long, 6 months, 1 year, and see who really is struggling, who really needs the benefit, and where the fraud is." Sometimes they say that pausing
Well, why
things
would
helps
they need to
helps
have a
ferret out
pause on
fraud. Well, pause in, and this is the thing, pause in refugees, or pause right, extended vetting, pause in extending benefits.
But that's
It
ignoring
was
the reason why there are refugees and why there are benefits. It's like, the reason that there are benefits and that refugees are allowed to come into the country is because they need to. And so to be like, well, we're just going to ignore the fact that you need that right now because we have more important administrative matters to take care of.
yeah. I mean, we have to do what we can sustain. If we can't run faster than we have strength, right? If we can administer it well, then they're better off seeking refugee status in another country.
Again, it's that we didn't administer it well. It's not that we're
Yeah.
not. So as long as they can verify that the system is working correctly today, there's no reason to pause anything, because you can't correct for a mistake made 5 years ago by pausing it today.
Well, if there haven't been any changes, you're right. You're saying that there don't really need to be any wholesale changes. Just that we're not doing COVID. Just going back to business as usual is just enough. Is that essentially your position?
As long as it was working. I don't know. I had never heard
Okay.
of a $2 billion graft prior to that, so it seems like it was working to me.
There were whispers that there was fraud in the Somali community as far back as 2015. Obviously, not to the level that it rose 2020, and COVID is when the money got big, and they ultimately right got convicted, or investigated and convicted of this. I think though, yeah, unfortunately, this is right now this is fallen in the land of politics, that right? The people in power were the Democratic Party, and this looks bad on them. Do you feel like they're playing CYA? Like Tim Walz is trying to deflect and say that this was, you know, he just put people in place. He wasn't responsible, right? Rather than being the sort of the buck stops with him.
Yeah.
Um, right, as a way of trying to just protect, rather than saying, yes, this was a disaster. We made mistakes, but we promise we won't do it again.
Yeah,
They're
he
still
needs to
trying to
take
say,
responsibility, more
yeah.
responsibility than that.
Um, do you feel like uh, I guess then we should say so beyond I guess this is people question all the time why our benefits for immigrants are so high. And they almost feel like that immigrants have almost a preferred status to the government to get these immigrants are in line ahead of other Americans. Certainly that our taxes could be lower and that having such generous benefits creates sort of perverse incentives um, rather than have people try to tough it out and be entrepreneurial in their countries or seek another country. It's not the US, knowing that we have such generous benefits draws people here, right? We talk about even World War II refugees, and certainly those that immigrated in the 19th century came to America didn't receive anything like that. Um, is it fair for people to be skeptical of the level of support, government support given to immigrants? And if pushing back on that or withdrawing that sort of support is a trade-off, even though it will disincentivize immigration.
So I guess that the answer to that is what are your priorities?
Mhm.
So like we saw when like the refugees were being flown to like Chicago and they were being put up in hotels and stuff like that. You would see like community members that lived in those communities around the hotels. They would say like, how come you can give all this stuff to refugees and you can't give us that stuff that you're giving them? And that was
Mhm.
really upsetting to them. And so hopefully what those people did is they voted for different representation. That would put their priorities first because like we're talking about 50 different states with 50 different like
Mhm.
I said, Arizona, where I
Well,
used to,
immigration is a federal issue,
it is a
right?
federal issue in terms of like who gets in, but the way that they're treated and the benefits that they're given is absolutely up to the states. And
Okay.
because that's what I'm trying to say. Like in Arizona, where I worked with refugees, the welfare state was not generous.
Mm.
You would not, and they at that time, I don't know if this is still the case, but every 6 months you had to reapply for all your benefits because they wanted to always make sure that you were, putting your money where your mouth is, basically. And so you always had to prove you didn't have money in your bank account. You couldn't even have enough to buy a car. So nobody in Arizona who was a refugee could have a car. It's 120 degrees there, and they were having to walk all over the place or go on the bus. And so that's not Minnesota. Minnesota, as you said.
Oh, I think we got cut off, Judy. All right. I think we've had some technical difficulties tonight. Thank you for the as you watch this. This was a great debate, but interesting to know. I to sum up, I would say that a cut in benefits to immigrants and refugees is, while it might seem cruel and a harm, I think it's common sense right now. We should be skeptical of their need for such generous benefits and they should know that coming to the United States, they're going to be held to a standard that's going to be different. Oh, are you back?
Yeah,
Oh,
hey,
sorry.
yeah, no, I
Sorry.
like I'm saying though, it's local. The benefits that they get are local. So
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't like it, call your representative, go out
Yeah.
and campaign for someone else, move to a different state.
Yeah. I was just saying that I feel like America has a higher standard of living, but it's also a higher standard of citizenship. It's hard, right? We have more bills, like it's hard mode, Western civilization here. It's not easy mode, and it's a big step up to come here from the third world. Maybe too big a step up. Um, that if 81% of people who have coming from the third world are still receiving some sort of welfare years on end, we would hope, I guess the vetting is the people who we bring here have a good chance of being able to assimilate ideally and be self-sufficient.
Yeah,
Is
but
that the goal?
you know who else gets welfare? 100% of people over 65. So
You
we
think
should cut
Social
them off.
Security is
Some of them,
welfare? You think we've paid payroll taxes. If
some
I've
of
paid
them,
payroll
no, we
taxes, any of
are
that money I
paying
get is
payroll taxes.
yeah.
Our taxes, you and me would have lower taxes if we took 100% of people over the age of 65, especially the millionaires, especially the billionaires. They're still getting our hard-earned tax dollars. What,
Hey,
what the heck?
hey, I'm all for lower payroll taxes, even if it comes from the left,
Well,
right?
okay.
If you from the left want to reduce, you want to come from millionaires, Social Security benefits. Hey, that's new to me. I've not heard.
I'm
Normally
just
everyone
saying
from the
that
left
that
wants.
argument does not hold a lot of water because there's not a lot of Somalis here, number one. Number two, 100% of people over 65 are getting benefits. So, I mean, like you want people to get benefits, except you don't want people to get benefits,
All
like
right.
which is
Well, all right. So the issue, and is all right. So Somalis are the latest issue, right? The other flare-ups we had, right, were the Venezuelans when they came here in large numbers, right, and became criminal gangs that were taking over um, apartment buildings, and that had to be cracked down on. Haitians that were put into non-urban environments that were not assimilating well. We see over in Europe, right, where they're putting large numbers of Asian men in Ireland and in Britain,
Europe is
where
not
they're
America.
not assimilating.
It's
Right,
not
the
a
people are worried about that happening here, where they see a population of call them refugees, call them that come here, live in a very an intentional ghetto of their own choosing to live together and choose to not. There's not pressure to assimilate like there used to be. It's diversity is our strength. The left allows them to live here um without integrating and becoming westernized, and they worry about that conflict with what it means to the American ideas of self-sufficiency and of not, you know, using government benefits only as long as you have to and not as sort of a way of life is definitely sort of a cultural thing that we're skeptical that some of these communities appreciate, and we feel like that they come in that they're gaming the system, and that when we've seen them doing that, we should be skeptical of those communities. I feel like they deserve more scrutiny, and calling that just racism when it's based on um, things that have happened here in the US and not just we're not just imagining things, actual bad circumstances here in the US and other places. I think
it
that's
can
still
it
kind of fair.
It can be both, you know.
Okay.
It can be that there's racism, and it can also be that there's genuinely bad things going on. So, like if we take the example of the Eastern European immigrants that came in the 1880s, um, Congress was upset at like the communist threat. And maybe it was a genuine threat. It really didn't pan out in the United States, but it was all these people with all these different ideas. And so 1921 and 1924, they said, that's it. We're just gonna keep immigration from Western Europe and Northern Europe, and no more of these Eastern European immigrants. And then they put pressure on um, other countries in the Western Hemisphere in particular not to take like refugee Jews and other refugees, whoever else needed to come. And so you have this situation where like people in genuine need, because there were bad actors from the 1880s to the 1920s, had to die. They had to be sacrificed to that ideology in essence. And so, um, imagine like if in 1921 and 1924 Congress hadn't made those rules and they said, "Hey, let's take some refugees instead."
Well, yeah, if anarchists hadn't killed McKinley, there's lots of sort of pivot points in history. If the Archduke hadn't been killed in Serbia, would we have avoided World War One? Kind of things. So yeah, there are linchpins, and I'm not here to defend every action of 1920s. I didn't live through that, and certainly fear of Eastern Europeans feels weird now. But even Russians, right, who right, their culture is very different, and bringing them over here in large numbers, we would be skeptical of if all of a sudden they start making
But
claims
we'd
of
have no Google.
humanitarian needing of creating humanitarian aid organizations. We'd be like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, but we'd also have no Google. So what would you do? Google
Yeah.
would be Russian or Israeli, maybe something like that.
Well, yeah. I mean, yes, people that have come here and have assimilated and have and have succeeded in America, right, which is Western society at its apex. Um, then yeah, we welcome those, and we want to,
But
right,
you
but
wouldn't
people have
know.
been taking advantage of us. Maybe that
You
is it.
wouldn't. So, like, let's say Sergey Brin came over with he came over, and there were two other Russians with him, and they came over, and these two other Russians are some bad guys. Like they're just like running rampant all over society, like gangs or whatever. But Sergey Brin, he comes over, he starts Google. Would you have kept all three of them out so that these two other guys he came over with like didn't prey on society? Like it's like you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know, oh, hey, that one's going to be Sergey Brin. We'll take him and he can start Google and these other guys will keep out. You just don't know. And so you can only put in the controls and the regulations, and every community is different. Minnesota is going to treat it differently. Like Minnesota is not North Carolina, we're not California, it's not taxes or something like that. And that is the way democracy in America works, that you have
Mhm,
all these different systems that like are it's experimental. Well, Minnesota messed up that one, let's not do that, and
mhm,
it doesn't mean on a national scale no more immigrants ever. Just turn off the spigot.
mhm. I mean, one comment, one last thing, and this is not to be, but a common sense trade off was what if we prioritized immigration from our NATO allies, countries that have alliances with us. If those people want to immigrate to the United States, why don't we put them first at the line? Does that seem like common sense? They're mostly from Western democracies. They're more likely
Yeah,
to be
but I
able to
think
integrate here and choose for
that's what
themselves.
That's what Trump did during his first term. He said, his famous comments about what kind of countries belonged in the toilet and so on and so forth. Like, um,
Well,
and
his
so,
ban on Islamic countries was temporary, but he did do that.
well, no, I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about what he said about Haiti.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, you don't have people wanting to leave their country from Western democracies, first of all, and second of all, you often have people who have like French citizenship, but they are really Lebanese or something like that. In that case, which they're using it, as a third. The United States is their third place, so they've
Yeah.
made themselves economically useful enough that they can come from France,
Mhm.
but they're still Lebanese or whatever.
Yeah, well, the ethnicity doesn't bother me because just being exposed to France, they're used to our institutions. They've been westernized enough to
Yeah, but
understand
still,
voting. Voting
by
is not
that
just identity politics, things like that.
Yeah, but by that argument, the Somalis who are citizens should have been assimilated enough also to be able to immigrate. Let's say they didn't come from the United States. Like, if they're citizens, they've been here long enough to gain citizenship and, learn America.
Yeah. 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 All right. Fair points. Any final thoughts you want to say about yeah, either what we can expect from the government, or about what this says about, you say it just shows us that every state is different, and the 10th Amendment is important. I know you've said that, but put it in
Yeah,
your own
no,
words.
I'm going to agree with you. I think we shouldn't overreact. That I think drastically changing the policy on refugees and immigrants is not a good idea, because there's so many demographic reasons why we need refugees as well as any kind of immigrant. And so, um, to the extent that we're able to, America does an extraordinarily good job of assimilating immigrants, and I think we should continue to count on that strength.
All right. I don't know. For those who are saying I'm xenophobic, I'm trying to strongman or steelman arguments, things that people are saying out there. I'm not saying that these are my positions, but that I wanted to get uh, Judy's positions on these, and ask hard questions, right? Just because we scrutinize somebody who from or have to evaluate somebody from a different culture, doesn't necessarily make us xenophobic. We do have an obligation to do some vetting. It's why they're vetted before we come here. That's not xenophobic, right? Vetting is not xenophobic. You
And
would
yeah,
agree?
and to that point too, we're friends, and it's
Yes.
important to hear the extreme positions sometimes to better define your own position. So
Yeah.
it's not um I I wouldn't agree that Christian is xenophobic.
Yeah. But we like to address all the comments here. But as the goal is common sense and consensus, and I think yeah, Trump is definitely overreacting, but I think there should be a strong message to people to not game the system, that we're sensitive to that now, and you will be held up and bring shame upon your community if you're caught doing that. And hopefully that will that itself, will try to make people think twice before they participate, either directly or indirectly, with any type of these fraudulent schemes. And
Yeah.
I think that's a step towards good government as good citizens, and then we can go back to a trust but verify system. Thank you so much for joining me today. Eddie was sick. He will be back. Apologize for our technical difficulties, and appreciate those of you that joined, and those that watch this after the fact. Thank you so much. We'll catch you next time on Common Mansplaining.
Bye.